And so the practice of love is something that puts us in a very good position to deal with the sufferings that we face from day to day, sufferings that we experience in the lives of others that causes us some distress, and also helps us to encounter the very real suffering that exists in every part of the world. One of the things that came out from the very brief conversation that we had was that some people are experiencing suffering that maybe they have in their own lives, and some people are experiencing the suffering of others, and others are aware of the suffering from different parts of the world. But all of this is happening in our sphere, in our little world, in our little minds. And so it's important to acknowledge the distinction, as one of you, I think it was Seni, mentioned, that area of where we have some agency to deal with the various stresses that we sometimes create in our own lives, and to distinguish those types of sufferings from the kinds of suffering that are more existential, or that exist in the world that we encounter through things like the news or social media. And it's important because there's only so much we can do, right? So it's important to acknowledge the broader experience of other people, other countries, other beings' experience. And then it's important to see our own experience within that larger context, but also as people in charge of our own lives. So we can't do much about those other things in the world, but we can do something about our own lives. And one of the things that I frequently encounter when I talk to Buddhists is this strange disconnection between people who've heard the teachings and who are yet unable to put them into practice. And this is an important thing when we come to listen to the Dhamma, or read the suttas, or contemplate the teachings of the Buddha, that we're doing this in a way that matters to us. It's very easy to have an intellectual knowledge or a scholarly knowledge, but not actually put these things into practice. It doesn't matter how many suttas you know off by heart. It doesn't matter how many verses of the Dhammapada you can recite. What matters is if you're using this to help yourself come out of suffering. This is the whole point of the Buddha's path. And it doesn't matter unless you're walking it yourself. It doesn't matter unless you're understanding why the Buddha taught. And he taught because we all have this potential to apply these teachings to our own lives. And that's when it matters the most. One thing I'm very aware of is when I talk to people, just how different their experience of their spiritual world is to the experience they have of their day-to-day life. There's often two completely separate things. And I think the real place we'll experience true spiritual growth is when we integrate these things within our lives. So we don't keep our spiritual practice as something over there, something that we do on the weekend when we go to the temple, or for those few minutes when we offer some puja. We need to make sure that we're actually walking the talk, that we're actually integrating these teachings into our practice. And that's important because if we don't, then it's like we're missing an opportunity. We're really missing the place where that spiritual growth needs to occur. And so when it comes to things like some of the stresses we experience in life, it's important to place those stresses within the spiritual context and to see that our spiritual teachings actually have the ability to help us with these problems, with these things. Our spirituality, though, is not a magic cure. It's not a cure-all. It's just part of our toolkit. So we need to make sure that we're doing all those other wellness things like, exercising our bodies, eating well, sleeping well, and making sure that we're safe and that we have the things that we need in terms of practical things like accommodation and good food and all those sorts of things. And then spiritual practice can flourish. So we don't want to keep our spiritual practice separate, but we also don't want to over-determine it and think that just by hearing a few words of the Dhamma, it's going to magically transform our lives. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it might, but in many times, it needs to be part of an overall strategy to help improve our lives. One thing I noticed when the pandemic first started was that people would come to us or call us or talk to us, and they would say things like, I've never worked so hard, I'm working more and more. They're working from home and they were really stressed out. There's a lot of background stress, right? When the pandemic first started, we didn't know what was going on. All of the things that we love were taken away from us. All of our fun things were forbidden. And suddenly our world had shrunk and we were very much alone with ourselves. Sure, maybe we had Netflix or social media, we discovered the Zoom, but a lot of the things that we usually turn to for pleasure that help hide those feelings of stress, that help to disguise those existential crises that we all have, all of those things that usually keep that part of ourselves buoyant were suddenly taken away. And we were left somewhat exposed, as if that veil, that curtain that protected us from the grim reality of life had suddenly been drawn back. And we were starting to see for the first time things that the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago. Oh yes, things are impermanent. Conditions are unstable. All those things that you used to think of as yourself, being a tennis player, going out to restaurants, all of those things that you thought were you turned out to not be you after all. Then who are you? What's left? What does it mean to be this body, this mind? And so this is something that people started to grapple with a little during the pandemic. But what surprised me was things like people saying, oh, I'm working so much. I've got so much to do. And I sit at my desk all day. And I found myself having to give basic strategies, okay, well, so you need to set some boundaries for yourself. You need to turn off the computer at 5 o'clock and go for a walk around the block or change into some different clothes. These are not spiritual techniques. These are not things that are deep and meaningful, but they're useful to help give people some sort of boundaries around parts of their life. But when it's really going to make a difference is when we look beyond the symptoms of our discomfort, the symptoms of our unease, and start to inquire more deeply into the nature of reality, into the things that are going on beneath the surface all the time, regardless of whether there's a pandemic, regardless of whether there's a war, regardless of whatever's going on, these conditions are always occurring. And we need to develop wisdom to see those things. And so meditation can help us with this. The Buddha's teachings can help us point ourselves in the right direction. And then meditation gives us the clarity and the stability that we need to start inquiring more deeply into the nature of our experience. One of the wisdom aspects of the threefold division of the Noble Eightfold Path, of course, is samasankappo, that is right intention or right motivation, right thought. And the first aspect of that right thought is nekama sankappo, renunciation, letting go of material pleasures, sensual pleasures. And this is the driving force, usually, that leads to things like those kinds of personal stress that we have, wanting to work harder to get more money or to increase our status, to get that new position in the company, wanting more money to get more things, to have a good car. And these are, of course, social pressures, personal pressures. Often these are the kind of pressures our family, even our very Buddhist families, so for some reason instill within us, this desire for status, success, productivity, do more, be better, try harder, fill up all your time with stuff, get things that make you happy. And of course, this is going the wrong way. And we know this from the Buddha's teachings. And yet, time and time again, when I meet with people, I hear the same things. Oh, I'm so stressed because of this work, or I'm so busy because of this thing, or I want to get this thing, and so I need to work for that. The other night, I met an old Dharma friend, and he told me, he said, I'm chasing enlightenment. He told me, he said, you're chasing enlightenment, Bhante, but I'm chasing money and cars and girls. And I was like, okay, that's a pretty accurate description of his life. But the thing with the way he was living and will continue to live is that he'll never be satisfied by these things. And this kind of feeling within us, never being satisfied, always wanting more, being a slave to craving, always thinking that we'll be happy if only this happened or we had that. This is a big problem for us personally, but this is also the problem with the rest of the world. All those people that we love, care for, all of those strangers, all of those people in different countries. There's an insatiable craving. This is the root cause, of course, for things like disagreements in our own mind about what we should be doing, disagreements with people around us, competition for resources, countries going to war because of this dissatisfaction, always wanting more. And I was thinking today of one of my favorite suttas, which is the Rathapala Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 82, where we meet the young monk, Rathapala, Venerable Rathapala. So he's been practicing this renunciation. His pathway to renunciation was really intense. His parents, very wealthy, he was married to 2 women, he had all this wealth and status and prestige, and he wanted to become a monk. He wanted to practice renunciation. He wanted to let go of all of those hooks and traps of sensual pleasures. And his parents refused to let him ordain, and so he threw himself on the floor, and then he refused to eat, and eventually they relented. But the part of the sutta that I was thinking about is the part where Venerable Rathapala comes across the king, King Kauravya, and the king's an old man, and they're having a little chat. And the Venerable Rathapala teaches the king 4 short little thoughts that he had heard from the Buddha. And so he says, firstly, he says, this world is so easily swept away. Everything is just swept away in this world. The second thing he said is there's no shelter, no protection in this world. The third thing he said is that there is no owner in this world. And the fourth thing was that this world is insatiable, a slave to craving. And then the king says, yes, all that sounds very good, but what does it mean? This is really a good sign, you know, that someone wasn't just listening and kind of allowing things to wash over, but he was thinking about these things. What does it mean to me? How can I understand these teachings? How can I develop this kind of wisdom for myself? And so he says, well, you said that this world is so swept away. What do you mean by that? And Venerable Kauravya looked at him and said, well, you're an old man, but when you were young, did you used to ride elephants and ride horses and wield a sword? And the king was like, oh, yes. You know, I used to love riding elephants. I was really good at it. You know, he said actually, it was what inspired that question at the beginning of the session. He said it was like I had superpowers. That was his skill at riding. And he said, but now I put my foot over there, but I wanted to put it over there. I want to put it there and it goes over there. And he was an old man. He's starting to hobble around. He's starting to become feeble, weak. And he is like this fast-moving river that is sweeping away. This river goes so fast, you can't hold it back. And in the same way, of course, this is what's happening with our own lives. You know, there's this force which propels us, this change that is happening constantly to us, that we can't avoid, that will sweep us along, just like a very strong current. And this is what happens in life. Ashni, it's your birthday, but I can remember being your age, and now I'm an old man, and it was just yesterday. And so this is what Rathapala was pointing to, this truth of impermanence. And this, of course, if we're wise, should stimulate something within us, should make us think, okay, life is impermanent. How am I living my life? This wisdom is when we change the way we behave, the way we see things. Just thinking, oh yes, there's impermanence, is not enough. It needs to mean something to us. We need to make it real, to understand. That's why we mark birthdays. We need to understand time is moving on. How am I living my life? It's really important. And the king goes, yes, that makes more sense now. Yes, I understand. This world is just being swept away so quickly. And then the king says, well, next you said that there's no shelter or protector, but here in this castle, there's plenty of guards and weapons. What do you mean there's no shelter or protector? And Rathapala says, well, do you get sick? And if you get sick, do you feel suffering and pain? Can anyone help you with that? Can you share that pain with others? Is there anyone who can take that pain away for you? And of course, the answer is no. There's nothing that we can do. We experience suffering. We experience pain. There's no one who can shelter us. There's no one who can protect us. We have these illusions. Good governance, safety, peace. But recent events in the Ukraine just show how quickly that can change, how fragile that is. There is no shelter, there's no protector. People in Ukraine are shouting out for help. Come to our aid, protect us. But where is the protection? Where is the saviour? We know that there's been so many wars in the past. And even in our own small worlds, the illusion of protection of our parents or family or friends, it won't be there forever. We'll be left by ourselves, according to our karma, and that's just how it is. So it's a bit of a hard truth bomb, but that's the teaching of the Buddha that Rathapala shared. And then the king said, you said there's no owner. But I've got a lot of gold. I've got lots of things in my life. What do you mean there's no owner? And Venerable Rathapala said, well, you can't take any of it with you when you die. And this is such a simple piece of wisdom, right? I mean, it's so obvious. And yet every day we live our lives as if all those things that we have, all those things that we work for, obsess about, constantly surround ourselves with, we live every day as if those things are going to be here with us always, forever. We're so attached to those things. And there's even stories of people on their deathbeds kind of worried about, oh, but who's going to take care of this thing of mine? It's like, you're dying. Let it go. And so this process of attachment and craving is, of course, what we try to undo a little bit of by practicing things like generosity or developing some wisdom around those things as being impermanent, as not belonging to us, as being just stuff. And this, of course, starts to help us realize, oh, we don't need a lot of this stuff. We don't need to consume so much. We don't need to want to possess, to own, to collect all this stuff. This will help us. It will also help the environment. It will help in so many different ways. And of course, what's given, the Buddha said, is not lost. What's given is not lost. And this sutta goes on then to talk about how kings will take away things from us. Bandits will take away things from us or steal from us. Even fire or flood will take things away from us. And there's nothing we can do, right? All those things that we're attached to will be taken away from us. And maybe you've seen the news reports of what's happening at the moment up in northern New South Wales and Queensland. how people have lost everything, everything in one night. They lost everything that they had. Terrible, right? But yet, they're still here. They're still okay. They can move on. Those things are gone, but maybe they weren't as important as they thought. They're holding on to those things, and they had to let go. It's gone. Sometimes I think it's better to lose something in a disaster like that. It's good teaching, yeah, good practice. It's so hard for us even to get rid of things that are piling up in our kitchen cupboards, you know. So it's good to see how this is a truth. There is no owner. There's nothing we can do. This helps us to create some space between us and the things that we fill up our lives with. And the last thing the Buddha said, and this is where I'll finish off because I know I've already gone over time. The last thing that Rathapala said was that this world is insatiable, a slave to craving. And the king said, what do you mean by this? Probably the king already had some idea. Being a king, of course, you have an empire, right? And so Rathapala says, well, if someone was to come to you and say, I come from the East, in the East, there's a beautiful country with lots of fertile lands and wonderful buildings and lots of treasures and resources. What would you do? The king says, well, I would invade that land and make it my own. And what if someone came from the north and said, there's beautiful land here, lots of resources, what would you do then? Well, I'd take that too. And the same with the west and the south. This world is insatiable, a slave to craving. A king wants more and more empire. A president of a country wants more and more empire. We also want more and more. Always, right? We want a better job, a better house, a better car, a new mobile phone, a better partner. We always want more and more and more. We're never satisfied. And so it's important for us to see the relationship between this craving in ourselves, the kind of craving that we see in others that is destroying the environment, the kind of craving that we see in world leaders for more and more power and control. We need to recognize this within us. And we need to start letting go of that craving. And the way we do this is to develop the mind by practicing sila, when we let go of unwholesome, unskillful behaviors, by practicing good ethical conduct. We're not practicing a lot of bad ethical conduct. We're letting go of desires for other people's possessions, other people's partners. We're practicing in a wholesome way. Then when it comes time to practice meditation, just sitting down, we're already practicing some renunciation. We're letting go of all those other things that we could be doing to develop the mind through meditation. To see when we let go, what happens, what's left? When we let go, how does it feel? When we're not holding on, when we're not grasping, reaching, clinging and craving. When we're letting go, what is that like? Letting go is moving towards freedom. Freedom is the opposite of being a slave to craving. And then we can practice things like generosity, kindness. This is also letting go. This is also wholesome and good. And so in this way, we start to integrate the wisdom of the Buddha into our lives. We need to reflect upon these things that we do. Reflect, always reflect upon the practices, the spiritual practices that you take up. Reflect upon them as part of a broader reflection on how you're living your life. Utilize these practices to develop your mind. If you've been good and generous and kind, practice the recollection of generosity, chagunusati, remembering, oh, I'm a good person, I give. Allow this to lift your mind. Allow this to inspire your spiritual practice as a holistic part of your life. If you practice the precepts, practice the recollection of sila nusati. Remember, I'm a good person. I live a good life. I try not to harm others. I'm moving in the direction towards enlightenment. When we practice meditation, pat yourself on the back. You've spent some time developing your mind. How few people out of all the billions in this world, how few are taking the opportunity to develop their mind? How wonderful it is. And then look at all these friends that you have with you tonight, spiritual friends, Kalyana Mittas, thinking how fortunate I am to have these people to inspire me to be a better person, to practice well. These are such blessings to have in your life. And so even when there's stress in your own mind, in the lives of others, or in the bigger world, there's always going to be stress. Then we have these tools to help us. We live a good life, we be good people, practicing kindness, generosity, developing a mind of love. We're going to be in a much better position to feel okay about things in our life that are difficult. We're going to be okay to deal with other people when they're having a hard time. We're going to have a bigger heart of love to embrace the world when things are difficult. So this is why it's important to develop some wisdom within our own hearts, to make it meaningful to us. To practice well means to practice the path authentically, to walk the path, to make it meaningful to yourself so that you can grow, so that you can develop, so that you can become a person who is wise. And not only old, Ashni, but wise. Much better to be wise than to keep getting old. So this is my happy birthday message to you, and a short talk on the meaning of practice and how it can help us with stress. And I hope it'll be of benefit to you, and may you be happy.